CEO's daughter was paralyzed. Then a quiet single dad knocked and said, "Let me help her." The morning fog rolled off the Tennessee hills like a curtain rising on a forgotten stage. Inside a dusty garage-turned woodshop, just outside the sleepy town of Oak Hollow, the scent of cedar and varnish clung to the air. Hank Dalton's hands, rough-scarred, steady, moved across a block of cherry wood, the rhythmic scrape of a chisel, the only sound that broke the silence. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially not someone like Trevor Langston. The knock came with urgency, not loud but shaking. Hank froze mid-cut. He turned, wiping his hands on an old rag, and walked to the door. Outside stood a man who didn't belong. Perfect suit, pressed coat eyes sunken with desperation. He held a large envelope like it might fall apart if he let go. Hank stared at him for a long moment. Recognition flickered behind his tired eyes. The man spoke first. "My daughter hasn't moved in almost a year. Her doctors say it's permanent, but I don't believe that. I can't. You're the last person who might be able to help." Hank didn't answer right away. His gut twisted. He hadn't heard those kinds of pleas in years. Not since he'd left Atlanta and everything he used to be behind. "You've got the wrong guy," Hank muttered, though. He knew that wasn't true. Not even close. Trevor stepped forward, trembling. "I know who you are. Hank Dalton, M.D., former neurosurgeon. You disappeared after your wife's... after what happened. I've asked every contact I have cashed in every favor. Please, just look at her file." He handed Hank the envelope with shaking hands. "I'm not asking for a miracle," he said, voice cracking. "I'm asking you to see her. To just... try..." Behind the garage wall, faint laughter echoed. His 9-year-old daughter, Maddie, getting ready for school, humming to herself. That sound had become Hank's salvation. A reason to keep going. Now Trevor's face, so full of helplessness, felt like a ghost from another life. Still, Hank resisted. "You need a real doctor, one with a license, a hospital, a team. But none of them know what you know," Trevor whispered. "None of them had your hands." A long pause. Then Hank opened the envelope. X-rays, CT scans. A photo of a young girl in a wheelchair, dark hair falling across her shoulders, eyes empty of life. Her name was Sadie Langston, 16 years old, once an athlete and scholar, now broken in every way that counted. The silence in the shop grew heavier. "Where is she?" Hank finally asked, voice low. Trevor exhaled like a man surfacing from deep water. "Here, in Oak Hollow. I brought her with me. We've rented a house outside town." "Of course you did," Hank muttered. Still, he didn't send him away. Because Hank Dalton, no matter how hard he tried to forget, it was once the kind of man who believed broken things could be made whole again. Even now, some part of him still did. The chisel rested on the workbench like an unfinished sentence. And outside, a new story was about to begin. The storm had rolled in heavy that night, pushing dark clouds over the hills and soaking Oak Hollow in silence and rain. Hank Dalton sat on his porch, a mug of cold coffee in his hand and a 1,000-yard stare in his eyes. The man inside the garage, earlier, Trevor Langston, had cracked open something Hank had spent years welding shut. He didn't sleep much that night. Instead, he sat in the dark and let the past catch up. It came in flashes, sharp, surgical. The bright lights of the operating room, monitors blinking in rhythm, the metallic smell of antiseptic, his wife Elise lying on the table, her heartbeat in his hands. Then, flatline. It had been an experimental procedure, one he believed could save her. He'd pushed for it, insisted on it, even when the other doctors warned him to wait. But he was Hank Dalton, the neurosurgeon with the miracle hands, the man who reconnected severed spinal cords, who restored movement to paralyzed limbs. If anyone could save Elise, it had to be him. But he couldn't, and when her heart stopped, so did his career. He walked away from it all, the hospital, the acclaim, the life he'd built, and disappeared with Maddie, their daughter, then only 6 years old. He bought an old truck, found an abandoned woodworking shop, and tried to become someone else. Someone who fixed toys and tables. Someone who didn't make promises he couldn't keep. But now, Trevor Langston had opened the door Hank had sealed. By morning, the rain had stopped, but Hank's thoughts hadn't. He stood at the sink, staring into nothing, as Maddie trotted in with her backpack hair and a ponytail face glowing with that easy joy only children still owned. "Daddy, Can we stop at the library after school today? Miss Harper saved me a new mystery book. He smiled weakly. Yeah, bug. Of course. He packed her lunch, walked her to the bus stop, and kissed her forehead like he always did. But his mind was still caught between now and the night Elise died. After Maddie left, Hank returned to the garage, pulled the envelope back out, and spread the documents across his workbench. Sadie Langston's file was thick. Neurologist's trauma reports, imaging studies. The accident had crushed her spine at the L1 vertebra. Complete lower body paralysis. No motor function. No sensation. Standard prognosis permanent. But Hank saw something else. Not hope, not certainty, but a possibility. A faint glimmer buried deep in the folds of tissue and timing. An edge case so narrow, no one else would see it. He closed the file. It didn't matter. He had vowed never to hold that kind of power again. Never to let hope poison his judgment. Never to play God with another life. But something about that girl's photo, the way her eyes stared blankly as if she'd already left the world behind. And Trevor's voice, cracking with love and failure, echoed in his ears. She's not just paralyzed in her body. She's quit. I see her leaving more every day. By noon, Hank was back in his truck, headed down a gravel road toward the rented house on the edge of town. He parked sat for a moment with the engine idling. This isn't a comeback, he whispered to himself. It's just a conversation. He shut off the engine, grabbed the folder, and walked toward the house where Sadie Langston waited, silent still, and slipping further from the world. He wasn't a surgeon anymore, but maybe he could still be something. The Langston house sat at the end of a narrow gravel lane, shielded by pine trees, and silence. It was big, too big for a man and his daughter. But it felt hollow, as if grief echoed through the walls more than laughter ever had. Hank stood outside the door for longer than he should have. Then Rosa opened it, a warm-faced woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a calm strength that suggested she'd carried this family through more than just housework. You must be Mr. Dalton, she said, stepping aside. She's upstairs. Her name's Sadie. She knows you're coming. Just be patient. The house smelled like lemon polish and distance. Family photos lined the hall, capturing moments that no longer existed. Sadie with braces and a soccer trophy. Sadie on a roller coaster, mid-scream. Sadie between her parents at a science fair, with eyes bright enough to power the whole town. Now, Hank climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking like it objected to the weight of what he carried. At the top, Rosa nodded toward a closed door. She won't say much. She hasn't spoken to anyone besides her father in weeks. He knocked gently. No answer. He waited, then turned the knob and stepped inside. The room was still. It was filled with the kinds of things a teenager should love. Books, posters, old Polaroids, even a guitar in the corner. But everything felt unused, covered in dust, like time had stopped. By the window sat a girl in a sleek black wheelchair. Her posture was perfect, almost statuesque. She stared out the glass at the leafless trees beyond, her hands clenched on the chair's armrests, as if letting go might send her spiraling. Sadie, Hank said softly. She didn't turn. You don't have to talk. I just wanted to meet you. I'm Hank. Your dad asked me to come. Her voice, when it finally came, was sharp and flat. You can leave now. He didn't. I'm not here to fix you, or make promises, or tell you everything happens for a reason. That got her attention, just slightly. One eyebrow lifted. Still, she didn't face him. I'm not interested in therapy, she said, or carving or painting or inspirational lectures. I don't want a life coach. I want my legs back. Can you give me that? No, Hank replied, but I can give you this. 1 hour. Doing something with your hands. No expectations. No cheering. Just doing. If it sucks, I walk away. That finally made her turn. Her eyes were a deep storm, not from tears, but from anger burned down to embers. You're a woodworker, he nodded. I make things, tables, toys, rocking chairs. I figured maybe you'd want to try, just once. Sadie tilted her head, studying him. Why? Because sometimes Hank said you don't need to fix the big thing. Sometimes you just need to shape something small and see that you still can. A beat passed, then another. Finally, she shrugged. Fine, but if you try to hug me, hand me a motivational quote, or cry in front of me, I swear I'll throw something at you. Deal. he said with a crooked grin. She didn't smile, but she didn't say no either. Outside, the clouds were thinning the sun, struggling through, and for the first time in nearly a year, Sadie Langston said yes to something, even if it was only to carving a block of wood. The next morning, Hank's pickup rumbled into the Langstons' long gravel driveway just after 10. A battered leather tool bag sat on the passenger seat next to a small square of pale basswood. Rosa greeted him at the door. She's in her chair by the window. Been waiting for you, though she'll never say it. Hank gave her a nod. We're not staying inside today. He climbed the stairs, knocked once, and stepped into Sadie's room without waiting for a response. She was in the same position as before, but this time her head turned. You came back, she said dryly. I said I would. He lifted the bag. Get your jacket. We're going outside. Sadie stiffened. Outside. Hank nodded. The workshop's under the sky today. Smells better out there. Fewer walls. Less hospital. She hesitated. Her fingers curled around the wheels of her chair, then stopped. Too many people might stare. I don't do that anymore. Then I'll build a fence, Hank replied without blinking. Or pick a spot no one uses. But we're not carving in a bedroom that smells like antiseptic and sadness. A long pause. Fine, she said. But if one squirrel looks at me sideways, I'm out. Hank rolled her chair down the ramp Trevor had installed weeks ago, but never used. They moved through the overgrown backyard to a quiet patch beneath a sprawling oak. Golden leaves danced in the air as Hank brushed off a bench and positioned Sadie's chair beside it. Lesson 1, he said, placing the basswood in her lap, isn't about cutting. It's about listening. Listening to wood, she raised a brow. He nodded. It's lived longer than you. Grew through storms, held birds bent with wind. It has a story. If you rush it, it'll splinter. You work with it, not against. She turned the wood in her hand, skeptical. It's just warm and rough. Exactly, Hank said. It's alive in its own way. From his bag, he pulled a carving knife. Not sharp, but smooth with years of use. This was my grandfather's. It's older than I am, and it never lies. The blade follows your heart, not your hand. Sadie stared at the knife. What if my heart's a mess? Then the wood will show it. He placed the handle in her hand. Her grip was tight, awkward. Her fingers trembled slightly from the medications. She frowned. I can't hold this right. Sure you can, Hank said. But first, just hold it. No cutting today. Just feel the balance. For 20 minutes they sat under the oak breeze, shifting the light around them, while Hank guided her fingers, gently correcting posture pressure angle. Every time she faltered, he offered quiet redirection. No praise, no pity, just presence. At one point, she whispered, I haven't used my hands for anything but brushing my teeth in months. Then today's a start. Eventually, she made her first tentative cut. The knife jumped. A sliver curled off more than intended. She cursed under her breath. I told you. This was stupid. My hands. Look, Hank interrupted, pointing to the groove. See that? Yeah, it's a mistake. No, he said, it's character. Could be the start of a wing or a ripple in water. You don't hide it, you use it. Sadie tilted her head. You're serious. Dead serious. Best pieces I've made came from accidents I learned to follow. She looked down again this time, seeing not a mistake, but potential. And for the next hour she carved, badly, but bravely. When it was time to go in, Hank asked same time tomorrow. She paused, then nodded. Yeah, but this time I'm bringing music. That silence was killing me. Fair enough. He pushed her back toward the house as sunlight slipped through the leaves above. And beneath that oak tree something had shifted. Not in her legs, not yet, but in her will. The days slipped by, quietly. Each morning Hank arrived with a new piece of wood and a lesson that didn't feel like one. And each morning, Sadie was already at the door, waiting, never admitting it, but always ready. Their sessions became routine, familiar, safe. They worked under the same oak tree wrapped in flannel and fallen leaves as fall crept toward winter. The tools stayed the same, knife wood patience. But something else began to change, something harder to name. Sadie started asking questions. At first they were casual. Why basswood and not pine? Why does this knot always throw me off? Then more pointed, how do you always know what I'm about to do before I do it? Hank shrugged. Been watching hands for a long time. One day she tested him. She deliberately twisted her wrist as she carved a motion that would cause tension, and he caught it instantly, gently correcting her posture without a word. Sadie stopped carving and looked up at him. You're not just a woodworker. He didn't flinch. I used to be something else, he admitted. Something like what? But he didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he showed her how to carve the curve of a feather. That night, Sadie wheeled back inside, but her thoughts stayed under the oak. She sat at her window staring out her first carving in her lap, a rough bird shape with uneven wings. It wasn't beautiful, but it was hers. The next morning, her questions grew sharper. You never ask if I'm in pain, but you adjust my seat cushion. You knew to bring gloves the day my meds made my hands go numb. Yesterday, you timed my carving breaks before my tremor even started. She stared at him. You're not just trained, you're clinical. Hank sighed. He reached into his bag, not for wood, but for something he hadn't touched in years. A folded yellowed photo. A younger Hank standing beside a hospital, OR team coat button smile tense. I was a neurosurgeon, he said quietly. Sadie blinked. You, what? I specialized in spinal trauma. Your kind of injury. Wait, so all of this was a test? No, he said, voice firm. I stopped being a doctor 3 years ago. I haven't picked up a scalpel since, not after. He trailed off. Sadie studied his face. What happened? My wife, he said, voice thin. Elise. I operated on her. I thought I could save her. I was wrong. The words hung between them like smoke. Sadie's fingers tightened around her carving knife. So, you ran. He nodded once. I did. And then you found me. No, he said. Your father found me. I almost sent him away. But you didn't. No, Hank said. Because when I saw you, I recognized something I saw in the mirror every day for years. What's that? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. The look of someone who used to believe they could change the world, until the world changed them first. Sadie sat very still. Her eyes dropped to the carving in her lap, the unfinished wing, the ragged cuts. Healing's not about fixing what's broken, Hank said softly. It's about believing you still have something left to give. She looked at him then. Really looked. For the first time, there was no wall between them. Just two broken people, each teaching the other how to breathe again. 3 days. That's how long Sadie went without speaking to him. No texts. No carving sessions. Not even Rosa knew what was going on behind her bedroom door. Hank didn't push. He spent those days sanding an old rocking chair in his workshop, the same one he'd started building for Elise before the surgery. It still wasn't finished, not because of time, but because he couldn't bring himself to touch it after she was gone. He understood Sadie's silence. Anger was familiar ground. But on the 4th morning, his phone buzzed. Sadie, bring basswood. I have conditions. When he arrived, she was already in the backyard, bundled in a navy hoodie and wool blanket eyes, flint sharp. It standed rein spirit and mayorist. You lied to me, she said as he set down his bag. I didn't lie, Hank replied. I just didn't tell you everything. She snorted. Same thing. Silence, tense and brittle. Then she held up her carving from last week, a jagged almost bird with one side sharper than the other. Did you come here to study me? See if carving would magically reconnect my spinal cord? Track my progress so you could run back to the medical journals? No, he said flatly. I came here to help you stop dying inside. Her voice softened, but only slightly. So, this wasn't research. No charts, no reports, no cameras hidden in the trees, just me and you and a piece of wood. She looked away, chewing on her lip. Then why didn't you tell me from the beginning? He sat beside her. Because I didn't trust myself, and I didn't want you to think this was about redemption. She let that sit for a moment. Wasn't it? He exhaled. Maybe a little, but not at first. At first I just saw someone who needed to remember how it feels to make something instead of breaking everything in sight. And now I care what happens to you. Not your spine, you. Her voice was quiet. Even if I never walk again. Especially if you don't, he said. Because walking isn't what makes you powerful, Sadie. You already are. You just forgot. She stared at him, long and hard, then held out her carving knife. Okay. But no more secrets. If you so much as adjust my chair without explaining why, I will stab you. Gently, in the foot. Hank grinned. Deal. They worked in silence for a while, the quiet rhythm of blade on wood calming the tension between them. Halfway through, she muttered, I still don't forgive you. You don't have to, he replied. Not yet. But I might, she said, looking down at the wood. If you keep showing up. The next hour passed easily. They carved side by side under the bare trees, letting the work say what words couldn't. Something fragile had broken, but not beyond repair, and sometimes the breaks were where the light got in. Winter had blanketed Oak Hollow with a crisp hush. Snow clung to rooftops and icicles lined the edges of the Langston house like delicate crystal teeth. The garden where Sadie once carved beneath the oak was now buried in white, the bench a gentle rise in a smooth, frozen landscape. But inside, warmth had returned, not just from the fireplace in the living room, where she now carved with Hank each morning, but from the subtle energy that had crept back into Sadie's voice. The girl who once wouldn't speak was now cracking dry jokes, asking hard questions, and studying wood grain with the intensity of a surgeon. Hank had noticed the shift. Her focus was sharper, her hands steadier. She'd moved on from simple shapes to more complex designs. Flowers, wings, hands. She wasn't just carving anymore. She was creating. Still, the boundaries remained. He didn't mention medicine. She didn't mention walking. Then one Tuesday morning in early March, something happened. It was small, barely noticeable. Sadie dropped her carving knife. She bent forward in her chair to reach for it, but stopped. Her face went blank, then confused, then terrified. Sadie, Hank asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she whispered, "I felt something." Hank blinked. "What? My foot, my left foot?" It tingled. He crouched beside her. "Are you sure could be referred sensation? Phantom pain, maybe?" "No," she said, voice trembling. It was real. They tested it. Light touch, pressure. Each time she responded, not with certainty but with increasing clarity. Hank's hands shook as he helped her lift her pant legs and roll down her sock. Her foot twitched, a tiny involuntary flutter. But it was there. She saw it too. "Oh my God," she breathed. He met her eyes. "You need to tell your doctor. Immediately." An hour later, they were at Dr. Kimball's neurology clinic. Scans were ordered, reflex tests conducted. A battery of assessments lit up the room. Sadie clutched Hank's hand through most of it. By evening, Dr. Kimball returned with a look Hank hadn't seen in years, cautious wonder. The scans show neural activity in areas that were previously inactive, specifically around your lumbar spinal nerves, she explained. Sadie's heart pounded. "What does that mean?" Dr. Kimball paused. "It means your nervous system is trying to talk to your body again. Slowly, tentatively, but it's happening." Sadie's lip quivered. "But I thought it was impossible." "Nothing's impossible," Hank whispered beside her. "Just unproven." Dr. Kimball nodded. "We'll need more tests, more time. But this is significant." When they returned to the house, Sadie sat quietly in her chair, staring out the frosted window. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know what this means." "It means," Hank said gently, "you've already done the impossible. The rest is just chapters." A snowflake tapped the glass. She turned to him, eyes shining. "You think it's real?" He smiled. "I felt it." She looked down at her hands. Calloused, steady. Once she thought they'd stopped being useful. Now they were building bridges inside her body. She picked up her carving knife again. "I want to finish the bird." It had been 2 weeks since Sadie first felt her foot twitch beneath the blanket. Since then, the sensation had returned. Subtle, brief, but undeniable. Dr. Kimball had run more tests, always with the same cautious results. Motor neurons lighting up in places previously dark, neural pathways once dormant flickering back to life. It was nothing short of extraordinary, and someone else had noticed. It started with a call to Trevor, then an email to Dr. Kimball from someone with a EDU address and a very official-sounding title. Then a knock at the door. That morning, Sadie and Hank had been carving in the sunroom. Her progress had been steady. She was halfway through a piece that showed a hawk in the flight. Its wings spread wide, its feathers carved in delicate sweeping arcs. The knock pulled them both from concentration. Rosa answered it and called out moments later, her voice taut with concern. "Mr. Langston, there's a man here, says he's a doctor, from Maryland." Trevor appeared from his office confused. "Who?" The man stepped forward, tall, silver-haired, polished like a marble column. "Dr. Miles Rennick," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm from Johns Hopkins. I believe you have a rather unique case in your home." Sadie's stomach dropped. She wheeled into the foyer, Hank at her side. instinctively placing himself half a step in front of her. Dr. Rennick's eyes flicked toward her chair, then up to Hank. "Ah, and you must be the artisan? Or, should I say, the former neurosurgeon?" Trevor frowned. "Excuse me, how do you—" "We in the medical community talk," Rennick said smoothly. "Especially when a previously paralyzed patient begins exhibiting signs of neural regeneration without any formal treatment." He turned his gaze to Sadie. "Miss Langston, I've reviewed your imaging. Quite impressive. And rare." Sadie narrowed her eyes. "How did you get my scans?" Rennick shrugged. "Colleagues. Quiet favors. Your father's network has quite the reach whether he meant to use it or not." Trevor stepped forward. "I didn't authorize anything. But someone did," Rennick said. He pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen displaying brightly colored scans. Sadie's brain lit up like a Christmas tree in the motor cortex region. "You see this? That kind of activity doesn't happen without intense targeted stimulation. Repetitive fine motor work. Like, say, wood carving." Sadie's breath caught. "You've been watching me," she whispered. "Not personally," he said quickly, "but enough to know something remarkable is happening here." Hank's jaw clenched. "This isn't a research lab," he said. "This is a person." Rennick ignored him. "Miss Langston, this could redefine spinal cord recovery. You could be the cornerstone of a new therapeutic model. With your permission, of course, I'd like to document your progress." "Formally." "No," Sadie said flatly. "You don't get to document anything." He tilted his head as if confused. "Why not?" "Because I didn't consent to being part of anything. I wasn't told. I wasn't asked. You showed up with stolen scans and assumptions in a tone like I belong in a petri dish." Rennick looked unfazed. "Forgive me, but extraordinary cases invite interest. You're not just a girl in recovery anymore. You're a phenomenon." Sadie wheeled forward, closing the gap between them until she had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. "I'm not your phenomenon," she said. "I'm me. And unless I say otherwise, you don't get to use a single piece of my story for your research. Ever." Rennick's mouth tightened. "This kind of progress doesn't stay private forever." "No," she said, "but it starts with my permission." Behind her, Hank stepped up, a voice low and cold. She said no. "That's the part you're supposed to listen to." Rennick blinked, then turned toward the door. "I'll be in touch," he said coolly, "when you're ready to speak like a collaborator." And just like that, he was gone. Trevor exhaled and rubbed his temples. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this. I never told anyone anything." "I know," Sadie said, looking back at Hank. But her face was pale, her hands trembling. Hank placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "That's de boer sandoidentas. It's your story, Sadie, no one else's, and we'll make sure it stays that way." But in her chest, her heart beat a little faster, because now the world knew, and that changed everything. The hospital conference room was colder than it needed to be, air-conditioned against spring's early warmth, with chrome legs on every chair and a long glass table that made everyone feel too exposed. Sadie sat at the head, her fingers resting on her carved wooden hawk, its wings smoothed to perfection. On her left sat Dr. Kimball, silent but alert. On her right, Trevor. Directly across from her sat Hank, and this time he didn't wear his carpenter's flannel. He wore the truth. Sadie looked him in the eyes. "Tell me everything. All of it." Hank exhaled, folding his hands. "No excuses. No soft edges. I used to believe the brain could rewire itself," he said. "That with enough repetition, precision, and intent new pathways could grow around damaged tissue. I had early success with lab patients. A few cases. Enough to convince the medical community I was onto something." Sadie nodded, her voice steady. "That's the part in the articles. I read them last night." Hank looked briefly surprised, but continued. "My wife was my turning point. She had an inoperable aneurysm. I thought I could beat it. That if I applied what I knew, added new techniques, I could save her." He paused, eyes flicking downward. "She died on my table. My methods didn't fail. I did." Sadie's face softened for a second, then hardened. "So you ran?" "I quit," Hank said. "I couldn't touch another patient. Couldn't stomach a scalpel. I moved to here, changed my name, and built birdhouses to forget I once saved lives. And then my dad knocked on your door." Hank nodded. "I told him no. But I saw your file. I saw you. And I thought, maybe I could help you feel something. Not physically. Just something." She looked down at the hawk and the carving. The fine motor tasks weren't just therapeutic. I believed they could stimulate unused neurons, force your brain to find alternate routes, like building detours around a collapsed bridge. But I never intended to test it, not until I saw how fast you picked it up, how your body responded. That wasn't science. That was you. Dr. Kimball finally spoke. I've reviewed Sadie's recent MRIs. There's clear evidence of new neural activity near the lumbar region. It doesn't align with natural healing. It aligns with retraining. Sadie's throat tightened. You think this happened because of the carving? Dr. Kimball shrugged gently. It may have helped, but it only worked because you did the carving. You committed. You repeated. You rewired your own brain. Sadie turned to Hank. Why didn't you tell me this weeks ago? I was afraid, he admitted, that you'd think I was experimenting on you, that I was using you to redeem myself. She nodded slowly. I did think that. Silence fell. Then she picked up the hawk and ran her fingers over the wings. I asked you early on what this was. You said it wasn't about walking, just making something. It was, Hank said, until it wasn't. She looked up, her voice quiet but clear. So, what happens now? Trevor leaned forward. Whatever you want, sweetheart, you're in control. Sadie considered it. I want 3 things, she said. 1, full transparency. No more secrets. Done, Hank said. 2, if this turns into formal research, I want consent forms. I'm not a subject. I'm a partner. Dr. Kimball nodded. Absolutely. And 3, they all leaned in. She smiled faintly. Tomorrow we carve again, but this time I choose the wood. Laughter cracked the tension like sunlight through frost. For the first time she felt it, the sense that she wasn't being handled or studied. She was being heard. And the truth. It didn't hurt as much as she feared. It set her free. The first warm day of spring came like a sigh through the Langstons' backyard. Daffodils poked their heads through the soil, and the oak tree that once stood guard over months of carving sessions began budding with quiet resilience. Sadie sat beneath its bare arms once more, carving knife in hand, a block of walnut resting on her lap. She'd insisted on tougher wood this time, something that fights back, she'd said with a smirk. Hank sat nearby, working on a cedar panel, occasionally glancing over at her. There was something different in her posture now, less guarded, less afraid. They carved for over an hour without speaking. The only sounds were bird song, the rasp of steel on wood, and the gentle creak of her wheelchair as she shifted. Then Sadie froze. Her hands stilled. A long breath escaped her. Something's happening, she whispered. Hank looked up immediately. Where? My leg, left side, same as before, but stronger this time. He moved slowly, careful not to alarm her. What does it feel like? A buzz, like when your foot falls asleep but softer, warmer. He crouched beside her, eyes focused. Can you move your toes? She concentrated. Silence. And then a twitch, just the smallest flutter in her pinky toe. But it was real. It was hers. Sadie gasped. I did that. Hank's voice was quiet, reverent. Yes, you did. Tears welled in her eyes, uninvited but unashamed. This isn't supposed to happen, she said. Everyone said. I know what they said, he replied. But you're writing your own script now. By evening, they were back at the hospital. Dr. Kimball ordered another round of scans. This time, she brought in 2 colleagues. Word was spreading. The results stunned them all. There were now visible neural bridges forming around the L1 lesion site. Not healed tissue, but alternate routes. New pathways constructed over months of consistent fine motor engagement. Sadie stared at the images on the monitor, speechless. These weren't here before, she asked. Dr. Kimball shook her head. Not even traces. This is unprecedented. Trevor squeezed his daughter's hand. What does this mean, he asked. It means, Dr. Kimball replied, her nervous system is responding to stimulus in a way we didn't believe possible in cases like hers. Voluntary movement, limited for now, but growing. And the carving. Dr. Kimball nodded, likely a major contributor, especially given the discipline and repetition involved. Sadie turned to Hank, who stood quietly near the back of the room. You told me we were just making birds. We were, he said, and maybe a few miracles too. That night back home, Sadie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, legs still and silent, but with a new awareness humming beneath the skin, like something was waking up after a long, terrible winter. She turned toward her nightstand where the wooden hawk perched. For the first time, she believed it might one day fly. The next morning, she rolled into the kitchen where Hank and Trevor were drinking coffee. "Gentlemen," she said, voice bold, "I think it's time we start documenting this. On my terms." Hank raised his eyebrows. "Are you sure?" She grinned. "If the world's going to watch, they better take notes." She lifted her carving bag and wheeled toward the door. "Also, I've got a new idea for a project." Trevor asked, "What is it?" "A phoenix," she said over her shoulder. "You know, something that burns before it flies." And outside, under the returning green of the oak tree, the girl who once believed her story had ended began carving the next chapter. Within a week of the new MRI scans, word leaked. Not from Sadie or Hank or even Dr. Kimball, but from one of the attending specialists who'd reviewed her case. It started with a quiet email, then a medical podcast, then an article titled, "Teenager Shows Signs of Recovery and Complete Spinal Cord Injury. Could Fine Motor Training Be the Missing Link?" And just like that, the world showed up. Phone calls, emails, letters. Reporters parked outside the gate. A camera drone flew too close to the second-story window one morning, and Sadie, without blinking, aimed a slingshot out the window and nailed it. Too much, she asked Hank. He just smiled. Not enough. But the pressure grew quickly. Invitations came from every direction. Medical conferences, research institutions, talk shows, pharmaceutical companies eager to offer support. Some wanted data, others wanted her body. All of them wanted credit. One morning, Sadie rolled into the kitchen to find her father pacing, clutching a stack of proposal letters. "I don't know what to do," Trevor said. "They want you to participate in trials, experimental procedures, observational studies. Some even want you to sign over your case files." "They want to own me," she said. Hank stayed silent, but his jaw tightened. She looked at him. "This is what happened to you, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "Everyone wants to be the first to say they discovered the impossible. Doesn't matter who actually lived it." Sadie took the letters, dropped them onto the table, and wheeled outside. The garden was blooming now. She rolled beneath the oak tree and stared at her latest carving, a small child standing beside a giant bird, their hands resting on its wing. Rosa brought her tea, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay, Mija?" "I don't want to be their story," Sadie whispered. "I want to be mine." Later that week, she called a family meeting, this time with Dr. Kimball present. "I'll participate in research," Sadie said, "but I set the terms." They all leaned in. 1, I approve every use of my scans and data, no exceptions. 2, I'm not just a subject, I'm a collaborator. You want me in the room when conclusions are drawn. 3, I can stop participating any time for any reason. And if that's not in writing, the answer's no. There was silence. Then Dr. Kimball nodded, admiration in her eyes. "Agreed. You'll have full patient advocacy, every step." That night, Sadie drafted a formal statement with help from Hank and Rosa. By the end of the week, it was published online. "I am not a miracle. I am not an experiment. I am a person learning to live after being broken. If you want to study my recovery, you will treat me with respect, transparency, and dignity. Anything less is exploitation dressed in a lab coat." Sadie Langston. The post went viral. Disability advocates applauded her. Ethics boards referenced her in internal memos. Medical institutions scrambled to review their consent protocols. And somewhere in a university hallway, Dr. Miles Rennick slammed his office door. Sadie had reclaimed her story. Not as a patient, not as a statistic, but as a voice, a fierce, brilliant, and unshakable voice. Hank watched the movement she sparked from his shop. The workshop now crowded with young students curious about wood, about healing, about what it meant to shape something from pain. "You started something," he told her one afternoon. "No," she said with a smile, tracing the curve of her wooden phoenix. "We did." Spring rolled into early summer, and with it came a new kind of rhythm, quieter than the whirlwind of media, but no less profound. Hank sat in a different kind of meeting now. Not at a workbench, but in a university conference room, surrounded by clinicians, researchers, and medical ethicists. He wore a clean button-down, his calloused hands folded on a notepad, his badge reading, "Consulting Partner, Dalton Neural Rehabilitation Study." The title made him uncomfortable, but the opportunity, this second chance, was something he no longer feared. The medical board at Oak Hollow University had reviewed his past, his research, and most importantly, Sadie's progress. They acknowledged the results, but also the risk. He hadn't followed standard protocol. He'd operated in secrecy. He'd blurred the line between therapeutic support and experimental methodology. But he'd also stopped when she said stop. He'd listened when others wouldn't. He'd built trust, not a case study. And because of that, the board offered a path forward. He could continue developing his fine motor recovery techniques, but only under ethical oversight, full documentation, and with explicit patient consent every step of the way. Hank accepted the conditions without hesitation. This time he told them, I don't want to be right. I want to do it right. Meanwhile, back at the Langston home, Sadie was moving. Still in her wheelchair? Yes. But there was new lightness in her motion. She'd begun transferring independently, standing briefly with the help of forearm braces, pushing herself longer distances. And she'd started teaching. On weekends, neighborhood kids gathered in the Langstons' backyard, under the famous oak tree, to learn wood carving from the girl who wasn't supposed to feel her legs again. They carved animals and birds and comic book characters. They painted them bright colors and lined them along the garden wall. Sadie didn't hover, she guided. And every once in a while, she caught Hank watching from the edge of the porch, smiling in a way that said he saw it too. Redemption isn't always grand. Sometimes it shows up in sandpaper and slow mornings and shared silence and open doors. Hank still carried the guilt of Elise's death. That weight never vanished. But now it was joined by something else. Purpose? He had begun documenting his methods in collaboration with Dr. Kimball and 2 other universities. Each carving session with Sadie became a data point, but only if she signed off. Every improvement was logged, reviewed, and discussed in ethical forums where Sadie's voice was equal to any doctor's. During one meeting, a young intern asked, "What's the difference between this and traditional rehab therapy?" Sadie answered before Hank could. In traditional rehab, the body is the subject. Here, the person is the priority. The room went quiet. Later, Hank told her, "You speak better in rooms like that than I ever did." "That's because you wanted to fix people," she teased. "I just want to remind them they aren't broken." That night they sat on the back porch watching the kids paint their carvings. Rosa served lemonade. Trevor was on a call with the hospital's board, coordinating Sadie's speaking schedule. And under a string of garden lights, the house that once echoed with silence now pulsed with laughter, purpose, and renewal. Hank turned to Sadie. "I don't think I ever told you thank you." She looked at him puzzled. "For what?" "For letting me be part of your healing," he said. "You gave me something I thought I'd buried." She nodded, her voice quiet. We both needed each other more than we knew. Redemption, Hank realized, had nothing to do with medicine. It had everything to do with ownership, transparency, and the courage to return to what once hurt you most and build something better. 1 year after Sadie's first lesson under the oak tree, she stood at the front of a packed auditorium inside the prestigious halls of Hollister Medical College in Boston. The room, designed for the country's top medical symposium on ethics and innovation, buzzed with quiet anticipation. The audience wasn't just students and professors. It was hospital directors, rehabilitation specialists, neuroscientists, and policymakers from across the country. Sadie rolled herself to the podium, then stood slowly braced between forearm crutches. Her body trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the sheer act of standing unaided. That act alone was a statement. But what followed changed the room forever. She adjusted the microphone and took a breath. "My name is Sadie Langston," she began. "I am 16 years old. A year ago, I was told I would never move again. A year ago, I believed them." She paused. "A year ago, I didn't want to be alive." The silence that followed was immediate and complete. And then someone handed me a piece of wood. Not a treatment, not a cure, just something small that I could shape, something I could control, something that could be mine. She looked out at the crowd, her voice growing steadier. What happened next wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle. It was consistent, careful, and mine. Through carving, I built new strength. And, according to your own brain scans, I built new pathways. She tapped her tablet and the auditorium screen lit up with her before and after neural images. Gasps whispered across the room. "But that's not why I'm here," she said. "I'm not here to tell you that carving cured paralysis. I'm here to tell you that you must stop treating patients like cases before you treat them like people." A few doctors exchanged glances, uncomfortable, guilty. I didn't know my scans were being shared with research labs until a stranger showed up at my door with a tablet full of my data. He called me a phenomenon. He never asked my name. Her voice dropped sharp and clear. If you want to change medicine, start there. Ask the name, get the consent. Make the person, not the potential, the priority. Now there were nods, applause building, because what happened to me could lead to something new, something better. But only if it's done ethically with transparency and with the full voice of the people living the recovery, not just those writing about it. She looked down at her hands. These hands were supposed to be useless. Now they create, they teach, they sign consent forms, and today they hold this microphone. She glanced toward the back of the auditorium where Hank stood, arms crossed, eyes misty. We need more doctors who listen like Hank Dalton. We need more patients who speak like they matter. And we need to build a medical system that sees both. The crowd rose to its feet, a standing ovation that lasted long after she returned to her chair. Yes, sie sig staunig skar still. The following week, her speech was shared across medical schools nationwide. Hospitals updated their informed consent policies. Research boards reevaluated how data was collected and how patients were informed. Sadie didn't become a celebrity. She became something harder to ignore. A catalyst. At home in Oak Hollow, Hank received an email from a colleague he hadn't heard from in years. Your girl just rewrote half our ethics curriculum. Thought you should know. He smiled and closed his laptop. Sadie wasn't just healing anymore. She was helping the system that once dismissed her learn how to heal itself. The wooden bird still sat on Hank Dalton's workshop shelf. Unfinished, unpolished, uneven, in places its wings frozen mid-lift, as if preparing to take off. Sadie had carved it in the first week they worked together, back when she couldn't feel her feet, back when she barely believed in tomorrow. She had hated it at the time, called it clumsy, imperfect, a waste. But Hank never let her throw it away. Now, nearly a year later, he found her standing beside the shelf, her hand gently brushing the curved wing. Still looks like it wants to fly, she murmured. He glanced up from the rocking chair he was finally finishing. Elise's chair. The one he'd left half carved for 3 years. His tools were dusted off, the wood smoothed. He hadn't touched it until the day Sadie gave her Harvard speech. Now it was nearly done. You gave it wings, he said. It just needed time. Sadie looked down at the carving. It's not symmetrical. The left wing is too thick. Doesn't have to be perfect, Hank replied. It just has to rise. She smiled faintly. A few feet away, Maddie, now 10, was showing one of the neighborhood kids how to sand a carved fox. The yard had turned into a carving garden, dotted with small tables, buckets of paint, and the laughter of children. Rosa stood on the porch, a cold lemonade in hand, watching with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd seen the worst, and stayed for the best. Sadie wheeled over to the bench under the oak tree. Their oak tree. Hank followed, carrying 2 pieces of cedar and fresh carving knives. So, she asked, settling in, what are we making today? He sat beside her. No idea. Thought we'd let the wood tell us. She nodded, running her fingers along the grain. Feels like it wants to be something light. Maddie ran past her, laughter carrying through the breeze. Sadie watched her and whispered, sometimes I think she understood all of this before we did. Yeah, Hank asked. She told me once, broken things can still fly. They just need someone to believe in them again. He chuckled. Sounds like something you'd say. She's smarter than both of us, Sadie said, eyes twinkling. They sat in silence, tools in hand, letting the wind guide the first cuts. In that stillness, Hank realized something. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the flight. The bird had finally left the shelf, and it had carved its own sky. Healing doesn't always begin with medicine. Sometimes it begins with a chisel, a whisper of wood grain, and the quiet presence of someone who refuses to give up, on themselves or on you. Sadie Langston's journey wasn't just about recovery. It was about reclaiming ownership of her story in a world that tried to write it for her. It was about reminding an entire industry that ethics, respect, and human connection must sit beside every diagnosis and data point. And for Hank Dalton, redemption didn't come through a miraculous surgery or a second career. It came in the form of showing up day after day with no promises, just patience, just presence, just truth. Together they carved more than wood. They carved a path forward for medicine, for advocates, and for anyone who's ever been told what they can't do before anyone asked what they might try. The girl who couldn't walk stood before the world and demanded to be heard. The surgeon who couldn't forgive himself found purpose in the silence. And the bird they made together. It flew, because sometimes what's broken doesn't need to be hidden. It just needs to be held and shaped and believed in again. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched you, share it. You never know who might be waiting to hear that broken doesn't mean beyond repair, and that healing, real healing, is always a story worth telling.